Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on why the growth of propane deserves your attention. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the editor-in-chief of Turf Magazine, and this webinar is presented by the Propane Education and Research Council today. Before we get started, I would just like to cover a few housekeeping items. Please note the control panel that's on your screen. This is where you can submit questions in the question box in that panel. You can send your questions in at any time, and they will be addressed after the presentation by your speaker. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of that panel. Clicking on that will either expand or collapse the panel, so please be sure it is expanded so you can access the question box. Also, if at any time you experience a technical difficulty or have some other questions, you can also use the question box there and someone will answer you privately right away. So before we get started and I introduce you to your speaker, I'd like you to note that there's also 3 resources available on today's topic, and those handouts are available for download, and you'll see links in your control panel that's on your screen. There should be 3 links there, and you can download those as well for additional information on the topic today. So now we'll move on. I'd like to introduce your speaker, Jeremy Wishart. Jeremy is the Director of Off-Road Business Development at the Propane Education and Research Council. And in his role at the Propane Council, Jeremy leads application research and development and oversees market communication strategy and outreach in multiple outdoor power equipment market sectors that utilize propane applications. And these include commercial landscape, golf, sports turf, light construction, and material handling. Prior to his current role at the Propane Council, Jeremy served as Deputy Director of Business Development for the organization. And prior to joining the Council in 2005, Jeremy worked in the resort and tourism industry as an events and marketing coordinator for Snowshoe Mountain Resort in Snowshoe, West Virginia. He graduated from Shepherd University in West Virginia with a Bachelor of Science in Commercial Recreation and Tourism. So now I will hand it over to Jeremy and we'll learn about propane. Hi, Jeremy.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Ann, for that introduction, and good morning to everyone. And thank you for joining me on this webinar this morning. I hope this is a very productive, I'll say 35, 45 minutes for you. It is my goal to not give you a salesy pitch, but help inform you and really allow you to pique your interest in propane and then ultimately do some additional research on your own, whether it's coming to our website or visiting your equipment dealer or propane retailer. But there's a lot of information that I'm going to be going through in the slides here. I know the team at Turf is going to be sending out the presentation post this webinar. So certainly if there's things in there that you feel like you need to take notes on, you don't necessarily have to do it at this moment. You'll get the presentation later on. And then you can always reach back out to me and my contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start with some industry challenges, and I know everyone listening probably has their own set of challenges that they deal with day in and day out in their business and in their operations. But I've tried to highlight 6 kind of big topics or key topics that really the professional landscape industry is facing, but I think even more than that, multiple industries or pretty much the entire labor force in the United States right now is facing. These are realities that we all have to deal with, and we have to figure out ways to work around them, work through them, or perhaps maybe even make a negative a positive. So let's just go through these real quick. I know I'm not going to read slides word for word, but just kind of give you some ideas of what the slide entails. We know that labor costs have gone up 30% since 2014. That is reported by multiple agencies and multiple statisticians. So we know that increasing labor expense and a labor shortage is a huge issue right now, especially in this professional landscape market. You're a service-based industry. A large portion of your budget, perhaps even one of the largest portions of your budget, is based on a volatile market in terms of gasoline and diesel. And those costs can trend upward and downward and all over the place within a very short span of time. So planning for your fuel cost expense becomes a huge headache. As a service-based industry, you're also kind of at the whim of what the weather does. It could be everything from what we've seen in just the past, 12 months. It can be extreme wildfires, devastating floods, crippling drought, extended wet seasons, freak snowstorms like it sounds like we're getting ready to have in the upper Midwest this weekend. hurricanes, and I could list on and on. They all impact your ability to conduct business on a day-by-day basis, especially during the cut season. I'll even go one step further and say that the focus on emissions and the greening of everything as of late, and reducing the emissions, specifically sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, greenhouse gas emissions, those are becoming key drivers. So it's not just the weather, it's not just what impacts you in your day-to-day setting. It's even beyond. It's a national, it's an international, it's a worldwide phenomena that we're facing right now. So I want to talk fuel prices, and this is kind of primarily where we're going to focus most of this webinar on, because that's really where I think right now we can help you make a huge impact in your budget from a fuel cost standpoint. As shown here on the slide, gas prices are on an upswing yet again, gas and diesel both. As of I want to say 2 days ago, according to AAA, according to AAA, their fuel gauge report, gasoline regular prices are $2.84 a gallon right now. Diesel is at $3.08 a gallon right now, and premium, non-ethanol premium, is at $3.40 a gallon right now. The EIA, the Energy Information Administration, is projecting the U.S. national average to increase beyond what we saw last year in 2018, for the summer of 2018. They're saying anywhere from a $2.75 to $3 a gallon swing at the moment. Technically speaking, we're already beyond that. When you look at what the fuel source, the specific fuel source that this industry needs in that non-ethanol premium. So this brings us to our first poll question. And Ann, if you want to take over.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. So yes, everyone in the audience, please take a minute to read this poll and cast your vote, and then we'll show the results. So the question is, which of the following fuel types are used to power the mowers in your fleet? So please select one or more of the following of those choices there: diesel, electric, gasoline, and propane. So which of the following are you using today to power your mowers? And then we will show the results in a moment. Okay, so the chart will show up in a moment, and let's see, gasoline, 100% gasoline, 44% answered diesel, 11% are using propane, and 0% electric in the audience. So there you go. Thank you, everyone, and back to you, Jeremy.
Well, thank you. And that's encouraging to see that there is some propane users out there that are attending this webinar. And I fully understand the gasoline and diesel. That's what this industry has been built on. And that's kind of what we're very familiar with. So that has some staying power for sure. Gasoline and diesel prices, as I said on the previous slide, are increasing. At a minimum, we're going to see them hit the $3 a gallon mark, which they have done pretty much already as of today. Now is a really good time to consider alternative fuels, I'll say, especially propane, and that's what I'm here to present to you. So propane is a byproduct of both natural gas and crude oil refining, so it very much hovers between the crude oil prices that you see for gasoline and diesel and the basement prices that you see in terms of natural gas. We don't have the violent swings in terms of pricing that you will see with gasoline and diesel. Because of the fact that it is a byproduct of gasoline and diesel, there's going to be some ups and downs, but it's certainly not climbing and falling off of huge cliffs again and again like you see with traditional fuels. Even beyond the cost of the fuel, there are several state and national incentives that are kind of already in play. We'll talk about some incentives here at the end of the presentation, but just know that there are some other incentives out there that are already in play to help you convert your existing fleet of gasoline mowers over to propane. That'll help you not only buy down the cost of that conversion, but get to a positive ROI in a very short amount of time. And again, as I said, we'll talk about that here in just a few minutes. So in terms of how propane can help you improve your bottom line, I'm not going to be here to be kind of a snake oil salesman, and I'm certainly not going to paint it all as all doom and gloom or capitalize on any negativity. That's not who I am. That's not what I do. I just want to show you that there are opportunities for propane to help be the answer to improve your bottom line, especially as we're looking forward into the next, or we're at the very beginning of actually right now, the cutting season. I just want to help you understand that there are opportunities out there to significantly reduce a large portion of your operating budget. So that brings us to the next polling question, 2 of 4. So Ann?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Jeremy. So let's look at this from a different angle. Do you have any mowers in your fleet that are powered by propane? Let's see how many are saying yes, no, or if you're not sure, you can of course choose don't know. So let's see how many mowers, if there's any mowers in the fleet that are powered by propane. We'll show that again on the screen in a moment. And we're looking at the yeses are 20% in our audience do have mowers powered by propane. 70% do not at this date, and 10% don't know. So there you go. Thank you, everyone, again. Back to you, Jeremy.
So, I wanted to say, from the standpoint of, I'm going to be talking specifically about propane and how it can make an immediate impact on your operations. Like I said earlier, it'll help insulate you from the volatile traditional fuel markets. It'll help position your company as a market leader. And certainly as emissions and the talk of green and certainly politics and other things that are happening are going on, it can help us as an industry, as the original green industry, become more green ourselves going forward. So next slide. So I often hear from doubters talking about propane being just a fad, a niche, or even just only for a certain type of customer. And I hear that from not just landscape contractors, but I also hear that from equipment dealers. I even hear it from some manufacturers. I'm showing you on this slide that could not be farther from the truth. As you see, since we started tracking over 10 years ago, propane sales of both OEM propane mowers and both aftermarket conversions, and I'll explain both here in just a minute, have grown significantly over those 10 years. What you see in 14, 15, 16, 17, and then last year as well, is really because of things that PERC has done to really push this market in terms of media, in terms of programs that we have out there, such as incentives and kind of other things that we have going on. In just very round numbers, if we take 2018, there were roughly about 200,000 truly commercial propane mowers sold nationwide. Of that, about 75 to 80,000 of those mowers were what I will consider like-for-like models or apples to apples with where propane competes at present. So that's about the 36 to 72 inch deck size in zero turn, wide area walk behinds, and stand-on mowers. Propane makes up about 5% total market share when you're accounting for that apples to apples comparison. We currently do not have OEM solutions. There are aftermarket solutions that can be done for prosumer and residential markets, but we don't necessarily track those. Next slide, please. So I also hear from the doubters that, well, they always tell me my preferred brand doesn't offer propane, or I can't get propane on this red mower or this green mower or this orange mower. Again, the truth is, much like your brand loyalty and what you have in the automotive market, there are propane powered options that you'll see in the commercial mower market from an OEM standpoint. I believe there are 14 of them right now that offer OEM propane mowers, and we're seeing more every day. We're seeing interest build at the OEM level. All of these brands offer the same guarantees of performance, reliability, durability, and warranty coverage on their propane units that they do with their gasoline counterparts. And then if there's not a propane option on your preferred brand, on the next slide, we offer propane aftermarket conversions. These are perhaps more of interest to many by the simple fact that you can take current equipment that is in your fleet right now and convert it over to propane, or if there's a mower model that you're looking at that is not offered as a propane option, you can certainly convert it over to propane. The conversion kit manufacturers that are shown on this slide, they all offer high quality, fully certified, fully EPA certified, so they are fully compliant with all emission standards. They offer full service, everything from training all the way through to actual conversions themselves at the customer site. And they fully manufacture and fully test these conversion kits on your very popular engines, such as the Briggs & Stratton, Kawasaki, Kohler, Vanguard, you name it. They pretty much cover. So I like to say essentially any spark ignited engine in the air cooled and sometimes even liquid cooled 0 to 50 horsepower range can technically be converted over to propane. It's a great candidate for it. Next slide. So this brings us, oh, sorry. I was going to say this brings us back to our next, our third polling question of the 4.
Actually, I think we're holding that, Jeremy, so you can move ahead.
Okay, okay. So in terms of refueling, without a doubt, this is kind of one of the areas that I see the most hiccups or kind of mental hurdles that some can't overcome or that they see in their way. They always ask about, it's hard to find propane, or I don't know where to find a propane dealer, or it's complicated to get the fuel to my site. Again, that's simply not the truth. Propane is extremely portable. Propane is local. I like to tell people that the opportunities to show propane or get propane to your site are basically in your community. You drive by them day by day. You've done so for years, so it's kind of, it's lost in the shuffle. It's just white noise at this point. But I know many of you are accustomed to having propane infrastructure, or not propane infrastructure, sorry, refueling infrastructure with gasoline and diesel on your site already. When you think about propane and you think about the infrastructure needed, your mind probably goes to some large tank, some cumbersome setup. And again, propane is not only local and portable, but it's also easily implemented. Sorry, I don't know why that word was hard for me to say, but it's easily implemented on your site. The infrastructure is not only extremely cost effective. In fact, it's typically the cost leader of all the fuels, even traditional fuels like gasoline and diesel. But it can also be put above ground, it can be put below ground, it can be permanent, it can be temporary, and it can be installed where a lot of other refueling infrastructure is prohibited from being put in place by zoning ordinances. Spills are very rare. The footprint is small. The environmental threat, if you were to spill it, is nothing like you would see with gasoline or diesel. Propane vaporizes and dissipates into the air, whereas gasoline and diesel will then become a groundwater and soil contamination issue that you have to deal with. Your refueling infrastructure is going to be dictated by a few key things. You're going to arrange that with your propane retailer. They'll come out and do an evaluation of your size of your fleet and your fuel demands for that fleet. It's also going to come down to whether you have enough space or if you lease space versus if you own it. If you lease the space, sometimes you're not allowed to have refueling infrastructure on leased space. So there's two kind of options here. We have, on the left, you'll see the propane cylinder exchange. It's typically best for a smaller mower fleet. 1 to 10 mowers is kind of where we pigeonhole that for now, but it can be implemented across the array of mowers or any size of fleet. What this essentially is a propane retailer will come out to your site. They'll put a secure cage on your site where they will have cylinders stored in it. As you use those cylinders and put them back in the cage as empties, they will come out on a delivery schedule that they've determined with you and replace those empty cylinders with full cylinders, and you'll be ready to go from there. For larger fleets, it might be on-site refueling infrastructure, much like you have with gasoline or diesel. Again, it's a smaller footprint. It could be a 100, a 500, or 1,000-gallon storage tank, depending on your size, and it'll be a refueling pump that's installed there. You will then be trained by your fuel provider, your propane fuel provider, to do the refueling on site. So they will take care of all the training. They don't just come drop the fuel and then leave you on your own. Next slide. So one of the kind of aha moments that I see time and again with contractors that have contemplated propane and ultimately made the switch to propane is the savings that they see in terms of their fuel cost alone. And yes, the cost of the propane is less per gallon on a per gallon basis than gasoline or diesel, but there's also a lot of other factors that go into that equation. It could be spillage that you're seeing with gasoline or diesel, certainly loss of gasoline because of theft. Jerry cans that you have on your trailer are very easily picked up by passerbys. Ethanol issues can spoil fuel very quickly, and then if there is any water in that fuel, it's certainly going to evaporate, and you're going to lose fuel easily that way. There's also no storage issues with propane, so the costs keep compounding. But we typically say on a per gallon basis, you're going to average roughly 30% below the cost of gasoline and 50% below the cost of diesel. As I said earlier, the propane retailers, they're part of your community. Sometimes they're your neighbors. Like you, it's not just about the price to them. It's about the service. It's about the reliability, the dependability, and being a leader in the community, doing what's right for the community and the businesses that serve that community. Next slide. If you remember way back to the beginning of the presentation, you'll certainly recall me saying that labor costs have risen by 30% since 2014. Every landscaper has to deal with fuel, and they have to have a hired labor force to deal with the day in, day out work that they do. Whether that's full-time or seasonal or part-time, you rely on the labor force to conduct business. Propane can help you save money, help the landscape contractor save money in terms of labor force, simply by reducing the time spent. Some say wasted, I'll just say time spent at a local gas station filling up mowers or jerry cans with gasoline or diesel. Several of our case study participants, and a few that I will talk about here later, have pointed out to us that the savings that they've realized just by eliminating some of the gas station stops day in and day out have allowed them of savings of upwards of 30 minutes or more per day. When you average a 3 to 4 guy crew, that becomes a significant amount of savings, not just for that day, but also for the week, for the month, and ultimately the season. Further, it takes roughly about 2 to 4 minutes to swap out an empty cylinder for a full one. I will say personally, 4 minutes to swap out an empty cylinder would be moving awfully slow. It's a simple process. It's a spill-free process. The operator isn't left having the smell of gasoline and diesel on them day in and day out, and they certainly don't take that smell home with them to their family after work. Next slide. So I've purposefully left the emissions side of the conversation for the last 2 slides in this section here. Reducing criteria pollutants like sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides and greenhouse gas emissions isn't just a major factor to you as a landscape contractor. It's also going to become a far bigger component of your business if it's not already so. If you're not in a kind of a urban area right now, it may not necessarily be on your radar screen, but those of you from, like, say, the Chicagoland area or around bigger cities certainly know this by heart, that being able to prove that you're using emissions reducing equipment, or more green equipment, if you will, allows you to open up bidding on new customers, new opportunities. It allows you to gain a marketing edge against your competition. And ultimately, it helps you win new accounts just by knowing, or just by the customer knowing what you're doing with with your equipment on their site, and that you're looking out for not just their site, but the community as a whole. Propane mowers aren't just good in terms of emissions, they're actually quite a bit better than the EPA emission standards. The EPA has not done a emissions review on small engines in something like 12 to 15 years now. If I was a betting man, I would say that's going to come up within the next 2 to 3 years on their radar screen, just by nature of how long it takes them to get around to things. When you combine the emissions reduction qualities of a propane mower with the ability to directly impact a contractor's bottom line, I think it's pretty much a win-win situation. You can go after bids that require lower emission equipment, and you're not necessarily adding to the cost that you have to do, that you have to bake into that bid process. So it allows you to perhaps even bid slightly lower because your fuel costs, and your all-in costs are going to be better with your ROI using propane. Next slide. So I know some of you that are kind of in the more urban areas are going to know this, but other environmental factors, ozone action days and non-attainment days. If you're in rural areas, these probably don't necessarily impact you, but if you're around, say, Chicago or New York or Washington, D.C., or specifically out on the West Coast, you're very familiar with these ozone action or non-attainment days. Roughly 35 states have regular non-attainment days during the cutting season. It's certainly an unpredictable thing. It basically, the air quality and the emissions output are weighed day in and day out by the air quality management districts. They can call it at any time, and what that means, if they call an ozone or non-attainment, or some areas it might even be called an air quality action day, if they call that into effect, it basically puts landscape contractors that are running gasoline and diesel equipment on hold for the day, because excuse me, it basically outlaws the use of non-essential engine-driven equipment to be used. So you could basically have crews sitting around, or you have to figure out other things for them to do. What that means is a loss in productivity. Propane, because it is listed as a alternative fuel, is allowed to work on those ozone action days or non-attainment days in all 35 states and in all areas of those air quality management districts. Next slide. So I've talked a lot about mowers, and that's kind of where the easy entry into propane is in terms of bringing it into your fleet. But I also want to talk more about going beyond the mower and getting into all the other equipment that you can utilize in your fleet, and how propane can go and help you have a positive ROI on, say, your on-road fleet trucks, your fleet vehicles that you have. So next slide. So propane autogas, and propane autogas, it's the same fuel. We just call it propane autogas from a branding standpoint when it goes on the road. Propane autogas affords fleet vehicles many of the same opportunities that we've talked about with mowers. So operational cost savings, dramatic emissions reductions, simpler or less costly maintenance, especially when you compare them to modern compliant diesel engines and trucks right now that we're seeing being sold in the United States. Propane autogas vehicles have proven their capability time and again. They deliver comparable horsepower, comparable torque, towing capabilities, etc., the same as their gasoline counterparts. And if you think about it this way, if you convert your vehicles to propane, your fleet vehicles, you've simplified your fuel requirements across your entire fleet pretty quickly. Next slide. Propane autogas vehicles are not just for light duty, as you see on the left there. They're also medium duty trucks. We have a series of conversion partners that I'll show on the next slide here in a second that we've worked with to introduce medium duty operations, especially in key areas and in key products that industries like the professional landscape industry use day in and day out. Next slide. So much like I mentioned about our conversion partners for small engines, there are companies that offer conversions and applications for the fleet vehicles across your popular brands. So GM, Ford, Ram, or Chrysler, whatever you prefer to call them, and Isuzu. There are several options with regards to propane auto gas. However, your specific wants and requirements will dictate the route you go. So, for example, there's OEM propane dedicated vehicles, propane auto gas dedicated vehicles. That's where it operates on only propane auto gas. It starts on propane auto gas. That's the only fuel you have on board. These tend to work best in kind of hub-centric fleet applications where the vehicle is leaving from a home base and returning to a home base at the end of the day to be refueled. On the other side of the spectrum, there are biofuel conversions. This allows the vehicle to operate on gasoline or diesel, only one fuel at a time, not both at the same time. It can address anxiety issues, and certainly if you have public refueling infrastructure that you can have access to in a wider range, it opens up a lot of doors for you to utilize both fuels and extend your range, often doubling the mileage and reducing your fill-up intervals by half. So whether you prefer, I don't know, F250s, GM 2500s, let's say the Isuzu NPR HDs, or virtually any other option out there, propane auto gas has your back in terms of fleet vehicles from both an OEM dedicated standpoint all the way through a biofuel standpoint. Next slide. So I'm just showing you a copy here, or some copy here on Rotolo Consultant Inc. out of Slidell, Louisiana. Their fleet manager, those are his words, those are not mine. I'll let you read them and see what you may, or take what you may from it. They have a very large fleet of propane mowers. When they saw the opportunity cost savings and the simpler maintenance on their mowers, they started implementing propane auto gas into their fleet vehicles and had great success doing so. Next slide. So even going beyond the fleet vehicles, I know there are some contractors, hopefully on this webinar, that do more than just lawn service. They may do installations. They may do some construction. We have everything from ride-on utility vehicles like the John Deere Gator shown there, ride-on blowbacks, material buggies, in-field portable power. Specifically, that portable power is a very good opportunity to be able to use to recharge handheld battery equipment. I know there's some solar array options that are out there, but they come with their own hiccups and issues that can be presented while you're out in the field as well. So having a backup generator, specifically a propane inverter generator, which is quite a bit quieter than what you would see in terms of just a standby generator, it allows you to work very close to residential zones and in residential zones without making too much noise that somebody might complain about. Next slide. So if you're still on the fence about propane mowers, these next few slides are just some customer testimonials. So let's move to the next slide here. So this is Wes Eckhart. He's the Director of Operations at Bozeman Site Services in Bozeman, Montana. It's safe to say, back up for a second. One of the things that I've heard is propane only works in certain environments. Some have asked, does propane work at elevation? Bozeman is by no means a low elevation city. It's also not the highest of elevations, but it's certainly not at sea level for sure. So they're using propane across their entire fleet of mowers. They're having great success doing it. It's reliable for them. It's saving them money, and then they see it as a great investment. Next slide. So we're back to Rotolo Consultant Inc. You can see they utilize John Deere mowers in their fleet. They've been using it on their mowers. As I said earlier, they're now moving it into their entire on-road fleet vehicle range. It's a good decision for them. They know it was a good decision for their community, for their customers. It's a good decision for everybody, as they say in their own words. Next slide. And then Siebert Landscape. Ralph Meyer is the fleet manager of Siebert Landscaping. They're based in and around Chicago. They are a longtime propane mower user. A vast majority of their fleet is propane. As they said there, they did it years ago by just buying into 3 mowers to test and demo. It wasn't long after they tested those mowers that they started buying propane exclusively. They continue to do so to this day, and they continue to be a market leader in the Chicagoland market because of it. Next slide. So I fully realize that you want to know numbers, and that's probably what will be the make or break decision for you. We have on our website at propane.com a mower calculator. You can put in your own inputs. This is on our website. It is also available as a app for your smartphones or your tablet. And then there's also a desktop version of it, which is going to require you to do the math. But you can put in your own numbers, what you're paying for gasoline, what you have negotiated in terms of price for propane, and you can even compare it to diesel. It'll show you what your cost savings is going to be. It is going to show you what your ROI will be and how long it will take to realize that ROI. It will show you your cost per operating hour or day, whichever you prefer, and then your 1, 3, and 5-year averages. Next slide. And I realize too that you may be asking, especially right now, this all sounds great. How do I get the equipment? Who can I turn to get the equipment? About 2 years ago, we decided that we needed to do something about that. So we launched this equipment dealer and conversion specialist zip code or finder tool on our website. You simply plug in your zip code, and I believe this is even now with our new website on propane.com. If you allow it to find your location, it will help find the nearest equipment dealer to you within a 20, 50, 100, maybe even 200 mile radius. So you don't really have to do anything other than just visit the website. This will show you what brands they carry, how to get in contact with them, and what services they offer. Next slide. We also have our own newsletter that comes out quarterly called The Cut. It's specifically designed for the landscape industry professionals, but we also have a lot of our own propane industry members that have signed up for it to get this, as well as equipment dealers and many others. We put out the latest and greatest about our programs that we're offering. We do some product announcements on there from some of our partners. We talk about what the industry is doing, and we talk about the latest and greatest news that's in there. So if you would like to get that from us quarterly, visit us at propane.com/thecut. Next slide. And as I kept promising throughout the whole webinar, the incentive program, the Propane Mower Incentive Program. This is our program that we've now run for over 6 years that allows you to earn $1,000 cash back for the purchase of a qualified propane, OEM propane mower. So that's any of the 14 that were listed on the earlier slide, or $500 cash back for a qualified aftermarket conversion. When I say qualified, that simply means it's an EPA certified conversion. I know there are other conversions out there that aren't necessarily EPA certified, but I do encourage you to go for what is legal and what is supported. So you'll get that $1,000 or $500 cash back from us. Any one applicant is eligible to apply for up to 25 incentives, so technically $25,000 max if you were to do that. We've been running this program now for over 6 years actually. We've placed over 5,000 mowers through the program itself. It is well funded again for 2019. We've been seeing applications come in for the first quarter of this year. I fully expect that to pick up as we go into Q2 here and really get into the depth of the cutting season here fairly shortly. So propane.com/mower-incentive is where you find that. And I believe that brings us to our fourth polling question, which, Ann, are we holding off on that still?
Yes.
Oh,
we're actually going to put it up, which is on there. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, we are. We have it up there now. So thank you very much, Jeremy, for the presentation. And before we do move into the Q&A, We have some nice questions coming in. We will ask the audience a question first. And as you all see on there, it's how likely is your company to consider adding propane-powered mowers in the next 3 years? So just let us know your general thoughts at this point. Is it very likely, likely, neutral, or unlikely? And then we will jump into the Q&A so we can learn even more about this topic from the questions that you all have sent in. So again, how likely is your company to consider adding propane mowers? Let's see. Very likely, 40%. Okay, likely 20%. So we have 60% there for likely or very likely. Neutral 30%, and then unlikely 10%. So thank you very much all for again casting your vote, and we'll jump right into the Q&A. All right, Jeremy. So let's see. We do have some questions here, and we'll jump right in. The first is, let's see. With regards, let's talk about conversion for a moment. With regards to a propane aftermarket conversion kit, those that you were speaking about, how long does it take to convert a mower, and how much does that typically cost?
Sure. So I'll kind of give a long answer here, but then I'll summarize it with kind of a few key points. From a propane conversion kit standpoint, you're going to be buying it from one of the 3 aftermarket conversion kit companies that I had mentioned on that slide. So they will certainly come in, do some training and help you with your first couple of conversions if you're doing that in-house. They will also work with an equipment dealer to do that. The first conversion that I typically hear about from people being done takes them about a day. And that's simply because it's a learning process they're going through and kind of talking about and learning about each component that goes on. Really all you're doing is on a carbureted engine is replacing the actual carburetor with a dual bore Venturi propane carburetor. You're replacing the gasoline lines with propane lines, propane compliant lines, and then you're putting a vaporizer on. So it takes about a day for that first one. Once you've done the first one, from what I've heard in the field and what I've seen with my own 2 eyes, the next conversion itself is about a 4-hour process. That includes even putting the bracketry on for the tank to be held on the mower itself. From a cost standpoint, it really comes down to what the requirements are for the engine and the mower that you're putting the propane conversion kit on. It can be everything from as little as $700 or $750. It can also be $1,200 for the parts and components. And then certainly, if you're farming out that conversion to a dealer, there will probably be some labor costs on top of that. So the conversion process, just to summarize that, the conversion process is about a 4-hour process, and the average cost is going to be in that $700 to $1,200 range. So we'll say $800 to $900 average cost.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. So let's talk about maintenance for a minute. Let's see. So the question is, I handle maintenance on my equipment, and here we're talking about a mower specifically. Can conversions and maintenance on a propane mower be done in-house? I know you talked a little bit about the refueling, but can you talk about the conversion, which piggyback on what you just talked about, and then also any maintenance that might be required? Can that be done in-house?
Absolutely.
Employees.
Absolutely. So as I said in my response to the first question, your conversion partner and even your propane supplier can help you with the training to start doing the maintenance on a propane mower in-house, or the conversion in-house, sorry. The conversion is not all that complicated. If you're mechanically inclined, it's fairly straightforward. If you're already doing any sort of maintenance on your gasoline or diesel mowers, the maintenance for a propane mower is very much the same. So you're still going to be doing fuel filter, air filter, oil change. It's kind of the same thing. You're really not doing anything different. Routine maintenance on the site, on the system, or preventative maintenance is virtually no different than what you would be doing for gasoline. The one caveat that I will say is you're not going to have to deal with ethanol. So there should be, and there never will be, ethanol present in your propane system. You're not going to have to do carb cleanings. You're not going to have to watch your seals in the fuel system itself because of what ethanol can do to those. So you're actually gaining a little bit in terms of maintenance requirements.
Okay, thank you. So we'll switch gears a moment and talk about the incentive program that you talked about. So let's see. Specifically, does the Propane Council's conversion incentive program cover utility carts as well as mowers?
So at the moment, it only covers mowers. The Propane Council is governed by a 21-member board of industry professionals. We are in the process of talking through, because we have expanded propane in small engine applications across a wide array of equipment, whether it be utility vehicles or concrete finishing equipment or kind of any number of other small engine powered pieces of equipment. We are stepping back and taking a look and seeing what else is out there that we could potentially be in front of with an incentive program, or perhaps even missing that we just don't know about right now. So at this very moment, it does not cover utility vehicles, but we probably will be covering utility vehicles sometime this summer. I would expect an announcement.
Okay, and you would share that. The council would make an announcement about that so that our audience would be aware.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That would be something like the cut newsletter that we have. Yeah, we would announce it via the cut newsletter. I'm certain there will be some press release around it if we do that, if and when it does happen.
Okay, great. So we just have a few more questions here and a little bit more time. So I'm going to stay on that, the financing topic for a moment. Beyond the propane mower incentive program that we are talking about here, are there any additional incentives or tax credits that you're aware of that are available for propane mowers or maybe other equipment, but specifically mowers? Is there anything beyond your program that we might want to know about?
So I will quantify this by saying I know of state propane association incentives that are out there. We list those on our website at propane.com. We talk about other state incentives. Not all 50 states have incentive programs for mowers, but there are certainly some out there that do. So certainly check our website for additional propane state incentives from the state itself or the state propane association themselves. They can be combined with our incentive program. So in some cases, you could get, say, $2,000 a mower. Third-party incentives, they may be out there. We try to keep up to date on those. I don't know of any at the moment. But there is a website, desireusa.org, and it's DSIRE USA.org, that lists all current incentive programs from federal, state, and municipal agencies. In terms of taxes, and I can speak specifically to federal, and I'll preface this by I am not a tax attorney. I'm not even a tax professional. I don't want anything to be doing with tax professionals. Other than filing my own taxes every April 15th. From a tax credit standpoint, unfortunately, the IRS does not allow tax credits or does not see off-road equipment other than forklifts as being eligible for tax credits. It's currently working its way through Congress right now in terms of alt fuel tax credits that would be retroactive for 18, perhaps even 17. And then forward through 19. There's nothing in place right now, but they've never had, and for reasons I cannot explain, they've never had a provision in there for propane mowers or any alternative fuel mower whatsoever. There are tax incentives when they are available, when Congress gets their act together, that usually come out that are available for refueling infrastructure if you own the refueling infrastructure at your site. And typically that's going to be 30% of the cost for up to $30,000. That's what it's been in the past. I would imagine that's what it'll be going forward if they ever get around to approving it.
So for the refueling, propane refueling infrastructure, there is some type of tax credit existing at this point.
So it's not in play at this moment because Congress let that alternative fuel tax credit die with, I believe, it's calendar year 2017. I know it's in play in Congress right now. It's a bill. It's something they're working through, but they haven't taken action on it yet.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Okay, great. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, everyone, for sending in these questions. We do have one last question. If we get any more, we will certainly go through. But right now, this is our last question. And I do want to say, if If you have any questions after this webinar, Jeremy's email is there on the screen. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions offline. So with that, we'll wrap it up with this last question, Jeremy. And it's about on the maintenance side of things. You had talked about mowers, and then you also mentioned that there is other, you talked about fleet, you talked about, we had utility vehicles come up, ride-on blowers, that type of thing. So beyond mowers, is it okay for propane, is there any issue with propane sitting, so to speak, in that equipment that might be not used as often as a mower or even a utility cart? If it's something that, I think you mentioned a generator, if it's using a generator, is there any issue or concern with it sitting, in something that's not used as frequently as a mower? Is that a concern with propane?
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying here. So two things here, and propane does not go bad like other fuels because, one, it is kept in a sealed cylinder or a sealed container, if you will. Therefore, nothing can necessarily get into that container unless you physically do something to alter what's going in, and that would be extremely hard to do. Or I should say, it's a sealed container, and it also does not contain ethanol or byproducts of the ethanol process itself. So it doesn't go bad in the container. It can sit indefinitely. I hear reports consistently of landscape contractors that are using propane right now. When they winterize their mowers, they do the typical thing of belts, blades, greasing, oil change. They put the mower away, they let it idle down, they shut the tanks off, let the mower shut off. When they go back in the spring, all they do is go back in, turn the propane tank on, start the mower up. And it is the same as when they put it away. So there is no fuel spoilage issue like you would see with gasoline or diesel. And certainly, as I said earlier, there's no evaporation, there's no contamination because it is that sealed container. So it's a very reliable fuel in that sense that you can put it away for the fall, for your winter activities, whatever you do, whether that's plowing or whatever, and then get it back out in the spring ready to go.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for addressing that topic as well. So, Jeremy, I want to thank you for your presentation. It looks like we're out of time. So, again, thank you for sharing your information with us today, and, of course, to the Propane Education and Research Council for sponsoring the event. Thanks, Jeremy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thanks, everyone in our audience, for attending. We appreciate your attention and, of course, your questions that have come in. A recording of this webinar will be available online at turfmagazine.com shortly. It will also be on the Propane Council's website if you want to check out their website and learn more on the topic. And their website is propane.com. That will also be up there in the near future. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.